on April 6, 1945, just before sunrise. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka stood on a ridge overlooking a coastal village in southern Okinawa. A cold wind moved through the sugarcane fields, bending the stalks in slow waves. Below him, wooden houses clustered close together, their roofs dark with dew. Smoke from morning cooking fires rose gently into the gray sky. It was quiet enough to hear roosters crowing and the distant surf breaking against the reef. War felt far away, but Tanaka knew it was not. He checked his watch. 5:18 hours. American artillery had fallen silent during the night, but everyone expected it to begin again. Tanaka adjusted the strap of his field binoculars and scanned the village. Women were already awake. Children moved between houses, carrying buckets of water. Old men sat on doorsteps, their backs bent, waiting. They were civilians, unarmed, trapped. Tanaka was 34 years old. He had served in China, then in the Philippines, and now on Okinawa, where the battle was entering its most brutal phase. His orders were clear. All civilians were to be evacuated or removed from combat zones. In practice, that often meant forcing them into caves, trenches, or areas that soon became killing grounds. Tanaka had seen what happened when fear met chaos. He had seen families crushed between two armies that did not know their names. A runner approached from behind, boots crunching on gravel. "Captain," the young soldier said, breathing hard. "Regimental command confirms. The village must be cleared by noon." Tanaka nodded, but did not answer. Through his binoculars, he saw a girl stumble and fall near a well. Her mother rushed to lift her. The child laughed, unaware of the guns that would soon speak again. Tanaka lowered the binoculars. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came before difficult decisions. Orders were orders. Disobedience meant court-martial, possibly worse. Yet the faces below him were not enemies. They were simply people caught in the path of something far larger than themselves. As the sun finally broke the horizon, Captain Tanaka made a decision that would define the rest of his life, whether he survived the day or not. Hiroshi Tanaka had not joined the Imperial Japanese Army to become a hero. He enlisted in 1931, the year after finishing a teaching certificate in Hiroshima Prefecture. His father had been a civil servant, quiet and disciplined. His mother taught him to read classical poetry and believed that restraint was a form of strength. When Tanaka left home, she told him only one thing: remember that every life has weight. By 1945, the war had stripped much of that belief from the world around him. Japan's military situation was desperate. Okinawa was the last major defensive line before the home islands. Commanders expected no retreat and little mercy. Civilians were viewed as potential liabilities, sometimes even as threats. Fear of spies, panic, and surrender shaped harsh policies that blurred the line between protection and destruction. Tanaka commanded a small infantry unit assigned to coastal defense and internal security. His men were tired, underfed, and frightened. Many were teenagers or older. Discipline was strict, but morale was fragile. Tanaka knew their names, their home prefectures, and the lies they told in letters to their families. He did not speak openly about doubt, but his silence often carried it. He had already witnessed civilians being forced from villages under artillery fire. He had seen caves sealed with grenades because soldiers believed enemies might be hiding inside, only to hear screaming afterward. These experiences did not turn him against his uniform, but they hollowed something inside him. He began to see obedience as a weapon that could cut in any direction. The village, below the ridge, was different. It had not yet been hit directly. Its people had nowhere to go. American forces were advancing from the south. Japanese units were scattered and retreating. Evacuation routes were blocked or dangerous. Command wanted the area cleared, a word that sounded clean but meant chaos on the ground. Tanaka understood what was expected. He was to move the civilians inland immediately, using force if necessary. If resistance occurred, he was authorized to act decisively. No further clarification was offered. He gathered his squad leaders near a rock out. His voice was calm. He repeated the orders as given word for word. Then he added something that was not written. "No weapons toward civilians unless I give the order myself," he said. The men exchanged glances but nodded. Tanaka was not naive. He knew he could not stop the war or save everyone. He also knew that every hour mattered. Delay could mean discovery. Discovery could mean punishment. Still, he believed there was space, however small, between blind obedience and open rebellion. He intended to stand in that space. As the men prepared to move, Tanaka looked once more toward the village. He did not think of politics or victory. He thought of his mother's words and the weight of a single life multiplied by hundreds. The path ahead was narrow, and it was closing fast. Captain Tanaka entered the village on foot, rifle slung but untouched. His men followed in loose formation, spreading out but keeping distance from the houses. The civilians froze when they saw the uniforms. Some bowed instinctively. Others stood still, waiting for shouting, blows, or worse. None came. Tanaka raised his hands, palms open, a gesture that surprised both sides. He spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. He told them fighting was coming. He told them staying would be dangerous. He did not threaten. He did not lie. He said he would help them leave safely if they trusted him. Fear did not disappear, but it shifted. An elderly man stepped forward. His voice shook as he asked where they were supposed to go. Tanaka did not have a good answer. He named a valley to the north that had not yet been shelled. It was not safe. It was simply safer. Moving civilians took time. Children cried. Some refused to leave their homes. A woman clutched a family altar and would not let go. Tanaka ordered his men to carry the elderly, not drag them. He repeated the instruction twice. Hours passed. Scouts reported distant gunfire growing louder. A messenger arrived from battalion headquarters asking why the village was not yet cleared. Tanaka replied that the terrain was difficult and that civilians were cooperating slowly. It was a half-truth, thin as paper. As the line of villagers stretched along the dirt road, American shells began landing closer. The ground shook. Dust filled the air. Panic surged. One explosion knocked several people down. Tanaka ran toward them, pulling a child to his feet, shouting for everyone to keep moving. In that moment, rank disappeared. There was only motion and fear. His men watched him. Some followed his example. Others hesitated, torn between training and instinct. One soldier asked if they should hurry the civilians at gunpoint. Tanaka shook his head. "They move faster alive," he said. By late afternoon, they reached the valley. It was crowded with refugees from other villages, but it was not under immediate fire. Tanaka told the people to spread out, to stay low, to find cover. He gave what little food his unit carried. He wrote down the village name and the number of people he believed he had moved, knowing the list might one day be questioned. That night, Tanaka did not sleep. He expected a rest at dawn. Instead, he received new orders to withdraw farther north. No mention was made of the village. No praise. No punishment. The war moved on. Weeks later, Tanaka learned that the village he had cleared was destroyed in heavy fighting. Had the civilians remained, many would not have survived. The knowledge did not bring relief. It brought a quiet, lasting weight. Tanaka continued to serve until the end of the battle. He followed orders when he could. He bent them when he believed he must. Each decision carved something away from him, leaving a man who was still alive but no longer certain what survival meant. By the time Okinawa fell, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka was no longer the man who had stood on the ridge at sunrise. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, not between sides, but within himself. The transformation was not heroic. It was human, and it was irreversible. By April 12, 1945, the situation on Okinawa had deteriorated sharply. American forces were pushing inland with relentless pressure. The Japanese defensive lines were crumbling, and chaos rippled through the ranks. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka's unit found itself cut off from many neighboring formations. Isolated but still responsible for the safety of hundreds of civilians he had managed to move days earlier. Orders from higher command were clear and harsh. All civilians were to be evaded forcibly or removed entirely if resistance slowed progress. The term remove was a cruel euphemism for brutal actions that Tanaka had heard whispered in the night but never directly witnessed. The brutal reality of war weighed heavily on him. Tanaka's men had grown restless. Some questioned his insistence on protecting civilians, especially as food and ammunition grew scarce. A young sergeant confronted him quietly. "Captain, if we lose this fight, we lose everything. Are you sure we can afford these delays?" Tanaka did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon where the distant roar of artillery blended with cries and gunfire. The impossible idea took root in his mind. What if, instead of following orders blindly, he chose to defy them not just to save civilians, but to shield them from becoming victims of both armies? What if he attempted to create a safe zone? A fragile pocket of peace amid destruction. A place where families could survive the battle without being forced into hiding or worse. The plan was perilous. Command would call it insubordination, perhaps treason. If discovered, punishment would be swift and unforgiving. Yet Tanaka believed that protecting civilians was not a weakness, but a measure of humanity worth fighting for, even at great personal risk. He began coordinating quietly with trusted men. They mapped routes, arranged supplies scavenged from abandoned stores, and set up watch points to warn of enemy advances. Tanaka sent messengers to local elders, negotiating safe passage and asking for cooperation. Every step was dangerous, every decision weighted by fear of discovery. News of his efforts reached battalion command. Tanaka was summoned. The officer who confronted him delivered a chilling ultimatum. Cease all civilian protection activities immediately, or face court. Tanaka held his ground, pleading for mercy and understanding, but refusing to abandon the people under his care. "No one else will," he said simply. Days later, with American forces drawing closer, Tanaka implemented his plan. His men moved families from exposed areas into cellars, caves, and tunnels far from the front lines. Food was rationed carefully. Medical supplies were scarce, but tended to the sick as best they could. Each night, Tanaka walked among the civilians, listening to their stories, calming their fears. He understood the weight of silence in a war zone. Many whispered prayers for survival, some shared memories of better times. Tanaka did not speak much. His presence was enough. The impossible idea had become a fragile reality, a small island of humanity within a sea of violence. But it could not last forever. On the morning of April 16th, the impossible became immediate danger. American tanks rolled into the outskirts of the village, their engines roaring like thunder. Shells exploded nearby, shaking the earth and scattering dust and debris into the air. Panic erupted among civilians. Mothers grabbed children, men scrambled for cover. Tanaka moved quickly, issuing calm orders. Stay low, move slowly. No sudden movements. His voice cut through the chaos. His soldiers formed protective lines between the civilians and the advancing troops. But chaos was inevitable. A sudden artillery strike hit a nearby building, collapsing it with a deafening crash. Screams followed. Tanaka sprinted toward the rubble, pulling survivors free. The ground trembled beneath him as another explosion rocked the area. He did not stop. Despite the noise and danger, Tanaka's men maintained discipline. They fired warning shots into the air, trying to deter stray gunfire that could hit civilians. When some soldiers urged pushing the civilians faster, Tanaka resisted, knowing desperation could turn order into tragedy. Throughout the day, Tanaka coordinated with both his men and village elders, ensuring safe routes and places to hide. Every movement was calculated to avoid both enemy fire and the risk of discovery by his own superiors. The tension between duty and conscience was palpable. As night fell, the village was mostly cleared of civilians, moved deeper into caves and underground shelters. Tanaka stood guard, exhausted but alert. Nearby, a radio crackled with fragmented commands and reports. The war was closing in. Suddenly, a group of soldiers arrived from battalion command. Their faces were stern. Tanaka knew what was coming. He was ordered to disband the protective zone immediately, to report all civilians to command posts, and to resume offensive operations without delay. Resistance would no longer be Tanaka refused. His voice was steady but resolute. These people are not soldiers. They are not enemies. I cannot abandon them to certain death. The officers threatened court-martial arrest, even execution for insubordination. Tanaka remained silent for a moment before speaking again. If I must be punished, so be it. But I will not send innocents to their deaths. The confrontation ended without resolution, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly among the troops. Some admired Tanaka's courage. Others feared the consequences. The impossible idea had sparked a small rebellion, a test of conscience in a war that had little room for mercy. In the following days, fighting in the protective zone was attacked repeatedly by both sides. Caught in civilians huddled underground, enduring hunger, cold, and fear. Tanaka and his men defended their position with determination born of necessity, not ideology. Eventually, overwhelmed and outnumbered, Tanaka's unit was forced to withdraw. The protective zone dissolved into the chaos of battle, but for those weeks, a fragile humanity had survived amid the destruction. After the Battle of Okinawa ended in late June 1945, reports surfaced of Captain Hiroshi Tanaka's actions. His attempt to protect civilians against direct orders was unusual in the context of a brutal conflict that often saw non-combatants caught in the crossfire or worse. Military historians later studied his choices as an example of quiet resistance within a rigid and unforgiving system. Tanaka faced official investigation. He was neither publicly condemned nor promoted. His fate remained ambiguous in official records, a reflection of the complex reality of war where obedience was paramount, but humanity sometimes slipped through cracks. The civilians he saved had mixed fates. Some survived to tell their stories, speaking of a soldier who chose mercy over orders. Others were lost in the relentless tide of battle. These voices became fragments of a larger truth, that war's victims are often the innocent who cannot defend themselves. Tanaka's story challenges the traditional narrative of World War II by revealing the tensions between duty and conscience. His actions, though limited in scale, underscore the presence of individual agency amid mass conflict. They highlight how soldiers grappled with impossible choices under extreme conditions. The significance lies not in changing the outcome of the war, but in reminding us that even in the darkest times, people make decisions that reflect their humanity. Tanaka's refusal to abandon civilians shows how personal ethics can endure, quietly resisting the dehumanizing forces of war. This story adds depth to the understanding of war's complexity, that not every decision fits neatly into categories of right or wrong. Sometimes, the hardest battles are fought within a soldier's heart. After the war, Hiroshi Tanaka lived a life largely away from public attention. He returned to his hometown and worked as a teacher, a profession that had once shaped his early years. He rarely spoke of Okinawa or his military service. To those who were asked, he offered little detail, simply emphasizing that survival required both strength and compassion. Tanaka's legacy exists in the quiet acts between orders and obedience, the small decisions that defy the larger machinery of war. His story was passed down through family and some former villagers, becoming a whispered memory rather than a headline. In interviews decades later, Tanaka described the weight of command and the burden of mercy. In war, he said, "We carry many things. Weapons, orders, fear, but the heaviest weight is the life of another placed in your hands." He did not seek recognition or medals. For him, the true measure was knowing that, however briefly, he chose to protect those who could not protect themselves. The world of war often demands absolute loyalty, but Tanaka's life reminds us that humanity can persist even in obedience. His story is a lesson that courage sometimes looks like restraint and heroism like quiet defiance. He passed away in the late 1980s, remembered by a small circle of family and friends, but largely unknown to history's grand narratives. Yet, his choices remain a testament. Even in the midst of destruction, a single person can hold on to their conscience, and in doing so, they preserve a fragment of hope. This is the history of World War II. Whoever oppresses the innocent is an oppressor. Neither the earth belongs to this oppressor, nor does the sky belong to him. We stand now and forever with the oppressed. 3 audience questions. Number 1, what would you risk to protect innocent lives when your own orders tell you not to? Number 2, in a war where chaos reigns, can one person's small act of kindness really make a difference? Number 3, how would you feel if you had to choose between following orders and saving people you don't even know? This is WW2 Files. See you in the next one.